High soul igniting story family. Get ready, because today we're bringing you a tender, soul-stirring tale that's sure to make your heart skip a beat. Let's begin. What happens when a billionaire's son brings home the woman he loves, and she's wearing a family heirloom that was supposed to be lost forever? Have you ever discovered something about your family's past that completely changed everything you thought you knew about yourself? Have you ever walked into a room and felt the weight of history pressing down on your shoulders, demanding answers to questions you didn't even know you should be asking? Tonight, in the heart of Charleston's most exclusive estate, a single piece of jewelry is about to expose secrets that 3 generations tried to bury. But how did this beautiful black woman come to possess the most guarded treasure of the Whitmore dynasty? If stories of hidden family legacies and unexpected love intrigue you, hit that like button now. Because what you're about to discover will leave you questioning everything you think you know about American history. Let me take you inside the world of the Whitmores, a name that carries more weight in Charleston than the Spanish moss hanging from their ancient oak trees. For 3 generations, this family has built an empire that stretches from real estate to politics, from social circles to business boardrooms. They don't just live in Charleston, they are Charleston. Winston Whitmore commands respect the moment he enters any room. At 62, his silver hair is perfectly styled, his handshake firm enough to seal million-dollar deals, and his expectation for his family as unwavering as the tides that lap at Charleston's shores. This is a man who has never accepted failure, never tolerated weakness, and never, ever allowed anyone to question the Whitmore way of doing things. Standing beside him, elegant as a porcelain doll but sharp as a Charleston lawyer, is his wife Vivian. She's the kind of woman who can spot a fake Chanel from across a ballroom and remember the maiden names of every Charleston socialite's grandmother. Vivian Whitmore doesn't just host parties. She orchestrates social symphonies where every guest, every conversation, every detail serves a purpose. Her eye for perfection has made her the unofficial queen of Charleston society, and her approval can make or break social standings faster than a hurricane, can uproot century-old trees. But it's their son Gabriel who represents everything the Whitmore name stands for. At 28, he's the golden boy who never disappointed, never rebelled, never strayed from the path his parents laid out for him like a red carpet to success. Harvard Business School? Check. Early leadership position in the family's real estate conglomerate? Check. The kind of polished charm that makes politicians jealous and business rivals nervous? Double check. Gabriel Whitmore was born to inherit an empire, groomed to continue a legacy, and expected to marry within the social circle that his family helped create. He's the kind of man who looks good in a tuxedo, sounds intelligent at dinner parties, and makes his parents beam with pride every time someone mentions his name. But here's what makes tonight different from every other Whitmore gathering in the past 3 decades. Tonight, Gabriel is about to walk through those mahogany doors with someone who will shatter every expectation, challenge every assumption, and force the Whitmore family to confront truths they've spent generations avoiding. Her name is Aaliyah Monroe, and she's about to change everything. When Aaliyah enters a room, conversations pause, not because she demands attention, but because she naturally commands it. Her beauty isn't just in her striking features or the confidence in her walk. It's an intelligence that sparkles in her dark eyes and the warmth that radiates from her smile. She carries herself with a kind of grace that can't be taught in finishing schools or purchased with old money. Aaliyah grew up in Atlanta, raised by a grandmother who filled her childhood with stories of strength, survival, and family pride. She's a woman who earned her master's degree in African American Studies, who volunteers at community centers on weekends, and who believes that education and understanding can bridge any divide. She's brilliant, compassionate, and completely unimpressed by titles or bank accounts. But tonight, Aaliyah is wearing something that will stop Vivian Whitmore's heart mid-beat. Around her neck hangs an ornate piece of jewelry that seems to capture and reflect light, like it contains its own private stars. The craftsmanship is exquisite. Intricate metalwork surrounding what appears to be a locket, with details so fine they could only have been created by a master artisan. It's the kind of piece that belongs in a museum, the kind of heirloom that gets passed down through generations with stories and secrets attached to every link in its chain. What Vivian Whitmore sees when she spots this necklace will drain the color from her aristocratic cheeks and make her question everything she thought she knew about her family's history. Because this isn't just any piece of jewelry. This is the Whitmore locket, a family treasure that vanished decades ago, a piece so significant to the Whitmore legacy that its loss was whispered about in hushed tones and mourned like the death of a family member. Tonight, 3 generations of carefully guarded secrets are about to collide with one woman's quest to understand her own family's truth. Tonight, the Whitmore empire will face its greatest test, not from business rivals or economic downturns, but from the power of love to expose hidden truths and force a reckoning with the past. The stakes? Everything the Whitmore family has built, believed, and protected for over a century. The question that will haunt everyone in that Charleston mansion tonight. How did the most precious Whitmore heirloom end up around the neck of a woman they've never met? The answer will change their lives forever. In the heart of Charleston's most prestigious district, where ancient oak trees whisper secrets of generations past, stands the Whitmore estate, a monument to power that has shaped the South for over a century. This isn't just wealth. This is legacy carved in marble and sealed with blood, sweat, and ruthless ambition. Winston Whitmore didn't inherit his empire by accident. His grandfather had clawed his way from modest beginnings to real estate royalty, purchasing land when it was dirt cheap and holding it until Charleston's coastal beauty became prime territory for the wealthy elite. By the time Winston took the reins, the Whitmore name commanded respect in boardrooms from Atlanta to Miami. But money was never the end game for Winston. Status, influence, and the preservation of family prestige, these were the true currencies he dealt in. Every business decision, every social alliance, every family choice served one purpose: ensuring the Whitmore legacy would outlive him by another century. Gabriel had been groomed for this responsibility since childhood. Harvard Business School, internships at Fortune 500 companies, early leadership roles in the family's real estate conglomerate. Every step carefully orchestrated by a father who saw his son not just as heir, but as a continuation of everything the Whitmore name represented. Excellence isn't optional in this family, Winston would remind Gabriel during their weekly strategy meetings. We don't just participate in Charleston society, we define it. The expectations weren't subtle. Gabriel understood that his marriage would be scrutinized as carefully as any business merger. The right woman would bring connections, social standing, perhaps even strategic business opportunities. She would fit seamlessly into the charitable galas, the country club events, the exclusive gatherings where Charleston's power brokers made decisions that affected thousands of lives. Tonight's soiree was the crown jewel of Vivian's social calendar. For 30 years, she had transformed their estate into Charleston's most coveted venue, where senators rubbed shoulders with shipping magnates and old money families celebrated their continued dominance. Invitations to Vivian's events were currency themselves, traded, coveted, and carefully distributed to maintain the delicate ecosystem of Southern high society. The estate sparkled under the weight of crystal chandeliers imported from Vienna, their light dancing across walls adorned with portraits of Whitmore ancestors who had weathered the Civil War, Reconstruction, and every economic storm that followed. Each room told a story of survival and supremacy, carefully curated to remind guests they were walking through living history. Vivian moved the crowd like a conductor orchestrating a symphony. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, her emerald gown flowing as she glided between clusters of Charleston's most influential residents. Every conversation was strategic, every smile calculated to maintain relationships that kept the Whitmore family at the center of the city's power structure. The guest list read like a who's who of Southern aristocracy. The Ashfords, whose shipping empire controlled much of the port's commerce. The Beauregards, whose political connections reached all the way to Washington. The Montgomerys, whose old plantation money had been successfully transformed into modern banking fortunes. These weren't just Gabriel's potential in-laws. They were the families whose daughters had been subtly positioned as suitable matches for the Whitmore heir. Gabriel was late, which wasn't entirely unusual. He often worked long hours at the company, and Vivian had learned to host the first hour of any event knowing her son would arrive when business permitted. She had already fielded 3 separate inquiries about his availability from mothers with marriageable daughters, each conversation laced with the kind of polite persistence that Charleston society had perfected over generations. Then the front doors opened, and Gabriel stepped into the foyer with a confidence that commanded immediate attention. At 28, He possessed the kind of presence that made conversations pause and heads turn. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, his smile genuine as he acknowledged familiar faces with practiced ease. But tonight was different. Tonight, Gabriel wasn't alone. The woman beside him moved with a grace that was both natural and cultivated, her presence filling the space in a way that drew every eye in the room. Aaliyah's dress was a deep burgundy that complemented her rich bronze skin, its elegant lines speaking to impeccable taste without ostentation. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and when she smiled, it was with the kind of warmth that made people lean in closer. Can you imagine the courage it takes to challenge 3 generations of family expectations? Drop a comment below if you've ever had to choose between family approval and following your heart. The room's energy shifted as Gabriel guided Aaliyah through the crowd. Conversation stuttered and resumed at lower volumes. Glances were exchanged behind champagne glasses. Charleston society was watching, evaluating, measuring this unexpected development against their carefully maintained social calculations. Gabriel seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. He introduced Aaliyah with the easy confidence of a man completely comfortable with his choice, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back as they moved through the gathering. There was no hesitation in his manner, no apology in his posture. This wasn't a rebellion. This was a declaration. Aaliyah handled the attention with remarkable poise. She engaged in conversation with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about Charleston's history, and listening with the kind of focus that made people feel heard. Her laugh was musical, her comments intelligent, her presence undeniably magnetic. But it was Vivian whose world tilted on its axis the moment her gaze fell upon Aaliyah's neck. The necklace caught the light like captured starfire, its intricate design more striking against Aaliyah's skin than it had ever been in the family portraits hanging on these very walls. Every detail was exactly as Vivian remembered from her mother's stories, from the faded daguerreotypes in the family albums, from the descriptions passed down through 3 generations of Whitmore women. The delicate filigree work, the unique pattern of the chain, the distinctive class that her own great-grandmother had described in letters Vivian had read dozens of times. Most telling of all was the central medallion, an intricate design that no jeweler had ever been able to replicate, despite the family's attempt to commission copies after the original disappeared. Vivian's champagne glass trembled in her hand as recognition washed over her like ice water. Her carefully maintained composure, honed through decades of social leadership, began to crack as questions flooded her mind faster than she could process them. How was this possible? The necklace had been missing for over 60 years, lost during the chaos following her grandmother's death. The family had searched everywhere, hired private investigators, even consulted psychics in their desperation to recover the piece that connected them to their earliest American ancestors. Yet here it was, worn by a woman whose presence in her son's life represented everything Vivian had been raised to view as a threat to their carefully preserved world. The irony was as sharp as it was impossible to ignore. The most sacred symbol of Whitmore heritage was being worn by someone who challenged every assumption about who belonged in their rarefied circle. Vivian's mind raced through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Had the necklace been stolen? Sold? How had it traveled from the Whitmore family vaults to the neck of this beautiful stranger who had captured her son's heart? And what did its presence here mean for everything the Whitmore family believed about their own history? The questions multiplied like fractals, each one spawning a dozen more, until Vivian felt as though the very foundation of her understanding was shifting beneath her feet. In that moment, surrounded by the glittering facade of Charleston society, she realized that her carefully ordered world was about to change forever. To understand the magnitude of what Vivian was witnessing, you need to journey back to Charleston in 1867, a city rebuilding from the ashes of war, where survival often meant forming alliances that transcended the rigid social boundaries of the Old South. Samuel Crow was not an ordinary artisan. Born into slavery on a plantation 30 miles outside Charleston, he possessed an extraordinary gift for metalwork that caught the attention of his owner's guests. When emancipation came, Samuel chose to remain in Charleston, establishing a small workshop near the harbor where his reputation for creating intricate jewelry spread quickly among the city's recovering elite. The commission that would define his legacy came from an unexpected source. Thomas Whitmore, Gabriel's great-great-grandfather, who approached Samuel not with the typical condescension of the era, but with genuine respect for his artistry. Thomas had inherited a struggling real estate business from his father and was desperately seeking ways to rebuild the family's devastated finances. The arrangement they forged was unprecedented. Samuel would create a masterpiece, a locket that would serve as the centerpiece of the Whitmore family's reclaimed status. But this wasn't simply a business transaction. Thomas, witnessing the ongoing violence and persecution facing freed slaves throughout the South, made Samuel an extraordinary promise: protection for his family and descendants until true equality was achieved in Charleston. The locket that emerged from Samuel's workshop was nothing short of miraculous. Hand-forged from gold that Thomas had somehow preserved through the war, it featured intricate filigree work that seemed to capture light and hold it prisoner. The central medallion bore an original design, intertwining vines that formed a pattern unique to Samuel's artistic vision, impossible to replicate because it flowed from his personal understanding of beauty and craftsmanship. But Samuel embedded something else into his creation: subtle symbols that spoke to his own heritage, tiny details that represented protection, strength, and endurance of family bonds. He carved these elements so skillfully into the overall design that they appeared merely decorative to untrained eyes, yet carried profound meaning for those who understood their significance. The locket was intended to be more than jewelry. It was meant to be a bridge between two worlds, a symbol of the possibility that Charleston could rebuild itself on foundations of mutual respect rather than division. Thomas wore it proudly at his wife's throat during the social events that marked their family's return to prominence, while Samuel quietly built his own legacy, knowing his work had helped secure not just artistic recognition, but a measure of safety for his children. For 3 decades, the arrangement was held. The Whitmores prospered, their real estate empire expanding as Charleston's economy recovered. Samuel's workshop flourished under Thomas's protection, and his children grew up with educational opportunities that were rare for African-American families in the Reconstruction South. The locket passed from Thomas's wife to his daughter-in-law, then to his granddaughter, each generation treasuring it as the symbol of their family's resilience and renewal. But promises made during desperate times are often forgotten when prosperity returns. By 1897, Thomas had passed away, and his son William controlled the family business. Charleston had largely moved beyond the immediate chaos of Reconstruction, and the social pressures to maintain racial hierarchies had intensified. When Samuel's son Marcus approached William about expanding their family protection agreement to include his own children, William's response revealed how completely attitudes had shifted. The dismissal was cold and final. William claimed no knowledge of any special arrangement between his father and the Crow family. The protection that had been promised until true equality was achieved was declared null and void, with William asserting that such equality had already been established through legal emancipation. Marcus Crow found himself facing a terrible choice. He could fight for recognition of his family's agreement with the Whitmores, risking the safety of his children in a Charleston where racial violence was increasing. Or he could disappear, taking with him the one thing that proved the relationship between their families had ever existed: the original sketches and measurements for the locket that his father had carefully preserved. The theft happened during a social gathering similar to tonight's soiree. Marcus, working as part of the catering staff for a Whitmore event, managed to reclaim what he considered his father's true legacy. Not the locket itself. That would have been impossible to steal unnoticed, but something far more valuable: the detailed plans that would allow him to create a perfect replica. Using his father's tools and following Samuel's precise specifications, Marcus forged a second locket, identical in every detail to the original. He then fled Charleston with his family, carrying both the replica and the secret of its creation to Atlanta, where they could start fresh without the weight of broken promises hanging over their children's futures. The Whitmore family never discovered the theft. The original locket disappeared during confusion surrounding William's wife's death in 1902, and the family assumed it had been lost or stolen by unknown thieves. They had no reason to suspect that a perfect replica existed, crafted by the son of the very artisan who had created their family's most treasured heirloom. For over a century, the two lockets existed in separate worlds. The original remained lost to history, while Samuel's replica was passed down through the Crow family line, eventually reaching Marcus's great-granddaughter, Ruth Monroe, who settled in Atlanta and married a man whose surname would protect her descendants from any connection to their Charleston past. But here's what nobody in that room knew yet. This wasn't just about a stolen family heirloom. This was about a promise that was broken over 150 years ago. The locket around Aaliyah's neck was more than jewelry. It was proof of a relationship that the Whitmore family had chosen to forget. Every delicate curve of its design spoke to the artistry of a man who had trusted in the possibility of equality and partnership across racial lines. Every gleam of its gold surface reflected the hope that protection and mutual respect could transcend the brutal realities of post-Civil War Charleston. The sacred tradition of mother-to-daughter inheritance that Vivian held so dear had been built on a foundation of historical amnesia. Each generation of Whitmore women had cherished the locket as a symbol of their family's strength and continuity, never knowing that its creation had been part of a covenant their own ancestors had betrayed. As Vivian stared at the impossible sight before her, she was witnessing not just a return of a lost family treasure, but the resurrection of a buried history. The locket's presence at this gathering of Charleston's elite was forcing a reckoning with truths that 3 generations of Whitmores had managed to avoid. Gabriel remained unaware of the storm building behind his mother's eyes, focused instead on introducing Aaliyah to family friends with the easy confidence of a man who believed love could overcome any obstacle. His hand still rested protectively on Aaliyah's back as they moved through conversations, his smile genuine as he shared stories about her work in Atlanta's nonprofit sector. But Vivian's trained social instincts were screaming warnings as she processed the implications of what she was seeing. The weight of history had just walked into her carefully orchestrated world, worn casually around the neck of a woman who might hold the key to secrets the Whitmore family had spent generations trying to forget. How much did Aaliyah know about the locket's true history? Was her presence here deliberate? A calculated attempt to expose the Whitmore family's forgotten sins? Or was she simply an innocent woman wearing a family heirloom, unaware that she was carrying evidence of promises broken and protection withdrawn? The questions pressed down on Vivian as she watched her son's happiness collide with the returning ghosts of their family's past. In her hands, she still held the champagne glass that had been trembling since she first spotted the locket, its contents now warm and forgotten as the foundations of everything she thought she knew about her family began to shift beneath her feet. The collision of past and present was complete. Samuel Crow's masterpiece had returned to the house where it was conceived, but now it carried with it the weight of broken promises and the power to transform everything the Whitmore family believed about their own legacy. Gabriel noticed a change in his mother's demeanor before anyone else could. Years of reading Vivian's subtle shifts in mood, a skill essential for surviving in the Whitmore household, had trained him to recognize when something was deeply wrong. Her champagne glass hadn't moved from its position in 20 minutes. Her smile had become fixed rather than genuine, and her eyes kept returning to Aaliyah with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. As they approached the corner where Vivian stood speaking with the Beauregards, Gabriel felt Aaliyah's hand tighten slightly in his. She had noticed, too. Despite her poise and confidence, she possessed a kind of emotional intelligence that allowed her to read rooms and people with remarkable accuracy. "Mrs. Whitmore," Aaliyah said warmly as they joined the small circle, "what a beautiful home you have. The portraits in the hallway are particularly striking. They must tell incredible stories about your family's history." Vivian's response was polite but strained. "Thank you, dear. Yes, our family has quite a legacy here in Charleston." Her eyes dropped again to the necklace, and this time Gabriel caught the direction of her gaze. The moment crystallized for him with sudden clarity. His mother wasn't just surprised by his choice to bring Aaliyah tonight. She was fixated on something specific. Something about the woman he loved was causing his normally unflappable mother to come undone in front of Charleston's social elite. "Mom," Gabriel said gently, excusing them from the conversation and guiding both women toward a quieter alcove near the library. "There's something you need to know." The simple statement carried weight that seemed to settle over the 3 of them like a heavy curtain. Aaliyah looked between Gabriel and his mother, her intuition telling her that whatever was happening went far deeper than typical family introductions. Vivian's composure finally cracked completely, her aristocratic mask slipping to reveal genuine confusion and something approaching fear. "That necklace," Vivian whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of the party. "Where did you get that necklace?" Aaliyah's hand moved instinctively to her throat, fingers tracing the familiar contours of the locket she had worn since childhood. "It was my grandmother's," she replied, her voice steady despite the sudden intensity of the moment. "She gave it to me when I turned 18. Gabriel watched his mother's face drain a color and knew they had crossed into territory that would change everything. "Aaliyah," he said softly, "I think my mother recognizes your necklace. Maybe you should tell her about your grandmother, Ruth." Under the unexpected scrutiny, Aaliyah displayed the kind of grace that had first drawn Gabriel to her. Rather than becoming defensive or withdrawn, she met Vivian's stare directly and began to share the story that had shaped her entire understanding of family and heritage. "I was raised in Atlanta by my grandmother, Ruth Monroe," she began, her voice carrying the cadence of someone accustomed to honoring family stories through careful retelling. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 6, and Grandma Ruth became everything to me. Mother, father, teacher, and keeper of our family's memory. Ruth Monroe had been a remarkable woman," Aaliyah explained. Born in 1925, she had lived through the Depression, World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, and into the new millennium with a dignity and strength that impressed everyone who met her. But more than her resilience, Ruth possessed something precious: the complete oral history of their family stretching back generations. "Grandma Ruth told me stories every night," Aaliyah continued, her eyes distant with memory. "Stories about survival, about dignity in the face of impossible circumstances, about ancestors who had been more than the historical record suggested. She always said our family had hidden truths that needed to be preserved, even when the world wasn't ready to hear them. The most important story centered around their ancestor Samuel Crow, a name that made Vivian's breath catch audibly. Ruth had described Samuel not just as a skilled artisan, but as a visionary who believed in the possibility of equality and mutual respect across racial lines. She spoke of his workshop near Charleston's harbor, his reputation among the city's elite, and most importantly, his relationship with a prominent white family that had promised protection for his descendants. "The same Samuel who made the pact with the Whitmores," Aaliyah said, watching recognition dawn fully in Vivian's eyes. Grandma Ruth kept those stories alive through oral tradition, passing them down even when it was dangerous to speak about such relationships. But the most significant revelation came when Aaliyah turned 18. On her birthday, Ruth had led her to the attic of their modest Atlanta home, where an old cedar chest held treasures that connected their family to a past most African-American families had lost to slavery and historical erasure. The attic discovery had changed everything Aaliyah thought she knew about her heritage. Hidden beneath quilts and faded photographs was an ornate wooden box, its surface worn smooth by generations of handling. Inside, wrapped in yellowed silk, lay the locket that now rested against her throat. It was a mysterious inheritance from a relative whose name Grandma Ruth would never say out loud, Aaliyah explained. "She called him the one who reclaimed what was stolen, but she made me promise never to research his identity. She said some secrets were too dangerous to uncover, even generations later." Ruth had insisted that Aaliyah wear the locket as a reminder of their heritage and the complicated history that connected African-American families to the South's white aristocracy in ways that history books rarely acknowledged. She spoke of it as both a burden and a blessing, proof of their family's artistic legacy, but also evidence of promises broken and trust betrayed. Have you ever found something in your family's belongings that completely changed how you saw your history? Share your story in the comments. You might be surprised how many others have similar experiences. What Aaliyah hadn't understood until this moment was the full significance of what she had inherited. Ruth had told her about the bitter dispute that followed the Civil War, how the locket had been taken from their family during a period of racial violence and broken promises. But she had never revealed the specific identity of the family involved. "Grandma Ruth said the locket was stolen from us generations ago," Aaliyah continued, her voice growing stronger as she watched the truth settle over Gabriel and his mother. "She said there had been a promise of protection, a covenant between families that was broken when prosperity made it inconvenient to honor. The stolen legacy had haunted Ruth throughout her life. She knew that somewhere in Charleston, there was a family who believed they had lost a precious heirloom, never knowing that it had actually been reclaimed by its rightful owners. But she also knew that revealing this truth could be dangerous for her descendants, so she chose to preserve the story while protecting her family through silence. For generations, both families had believed different versions of the same truth. The Whitmores mourned the loss of their most treasured heirloom, while the Monroe family quietly preserved as evidence of broken promises and stolen dignity. Names have been erased from family records, relationships have been forgotten, and the full story had been buried beneath layers of historical amnesia. As Aaliyah finished speaking, the three of them stood in silence, processing the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Gabriel felt the weight of his family's hidden histories settling on his shoulders, while Vivian struggled to reconcile everything she had believed about her heritage with the uncomfortable truths that were emerging. The locket around Aaliyah's neck was no longer just a piece of jewelry. It was evidence of a relationship between their families that spanned generations, a tangible connection to promises made and broken, and proof that the past had finally caught up with the present in the most unexpected way possible. The revelation hung in the air between them like a challenge thrown down at the feet of everything the Whitmore family had built their identity upon. Vivian's face cycled through emotions, disbelief, recognition, and finally, a kind of defensive anger that Gabriel had seen only once before, when a business rival had questioned the legitimacy of their family's early land acquisitions. "This is impossible," Vivian whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "Our family has never, we've always been—" She struggled to complete sentences that had once felt like absolute truths, but now seemed fragile in the face of Aaliyah's story. Winston arrived at that moment, summoned by some invisible signal that 30 years of marriage had taught him to recognize. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic in the alcove. Where Vivian's shock had been emotional and visible, Winston's response was characteristically controlled, a stern silence that spoke volumes about his internal processing of what he was witnessing. "What's the matter here?" he asked quietly, his eyes moving between his son, Aaliyah, and his visibly shaken wife. The question was directed to Gabriel, but his gaze lingered on the locket with a kind of recognition that confirmed he, too, knew exactly what they were looking at. Gabriel felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about introducing his girlfriend to his parents anymore. This was about confronting the foundation upon which his family's entire legacy had been constructed. The Whitmore empire had been built on exclusion and privilege, carefully maintained through generations of strategic marriages, business relationships, and social positioning that kept certain truths buried and certain people outside their carefully guarded circle. "Dad," Gabriel said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal, "Aaliyah's family is connected to ours in ways we never knew. The locket she's wearing, it's the one that disappeared from our family generations ago. It belongs to the descendants of Samuel Crow." Winston's reaction was immediate and telling. His jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, and Gabriel recognized the stance his father took when preparing for a battle he didn't want to fight but wouldn't back down from. "That's quite a claim," Winston said carefully. "I assume you have some proof of this connection." The challenge in his father's voice ignited something in Gabriel that he hadn't felt since college, when he'd first begun questioning the assumptions he'd been raised with. This compelling urge to bridge the gap between his family's comfortable myths and uncomfortable truths suddenly felt like the most important thing he'd ever undertaken. "We're going to find that proof," Gabriel said, his decision crystallizing as he spoke. "All of it. Every document, every letter, every piece of evidence that's been sitting in our family archives. It's time we chose transparency over tradition." Aaliyah placed a gentle hand on his arm, her touch both supportive and cautionary. "Gabriel, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted softly. "This isn't just about us anymore. This is about confronting our family's buried past and taking responsibility for the truth, whatever that truth turns out to be." The courage to face these uncomfortable realities felt both terrifying and liberating. Gabriel realized that love, his love for Aaliyah, but also his love for his family, was demanding that he become the catalyst for change that would either heal old wounds or tear everything apart in the process. Over the following weeks, Gabriel and Aaliyah embarked on a historical investigation that transformed both their understanding of their families and their relationship with each other. The Whitmore estate's archives, stored in climate control rooms beneath the main house, contained documents that hadn't been examined in decades. Working side by side, they uncovered family documents and letters that painted a picture far more complex than either family's oral traditions had preserved. Thomas Whitmore's correspondence revealed a man genuinely committed to the partnership he had forged with Samuel Crowe, while business ledgers showed payments made to Samuel's workshop that continued for years beyond the original commission. The hidden histories they discovered in family archives challenged everything both families had believed about their ancestors' relationship. There were letters from Samuel to Thomas discussing not just business matters, but philosophical questions about the future of the South and the possibility of genuine equality between races. There were thank you notes from Samuel's children for educational opportunities provided through Thomas's connections. Most remarkably, they found evidence that Samuel Crowe had been far more than a skilled artisan. His correspondence revealed a visionary who would use his artistic reputation as a platform for quietly advancing the cause of civil rights decades before the movement had a name. He had networked with other freed slaves who had achieved economic success, creating an informal support system that helped dozens of families establish themselves in Charleston's post-war economy. Gabriel and Aaliyah working together proved to be a powerful combination. Her background in nonprofit work had given her research skills and an understanding of how historical injustices affected contemporary communities, while his business training helped him navigate the legal and financial documents that revealed the true scope of the Thomas-Samuel partnership. The truth about Samuel Crowe's real story was both inspiring and heartbreaking. His belief in equality and transcending race and class had let him take enormous personal risks, using his protected status under Thomas's covenant to help other African-American families in ways that could have cost him everything. The pact between the families had been Samuel's attempt to secure not just dignity and safety for his own descendants, but to create a model for how racial reconciliation might work in the post-Civil War South. But history had betrayed those promises in ways that neither Samuel nor Thomas could have anticipated, when economic pressure and social expectations made it politically expedient to abandon the partnership. William Whitmore had chosen family advantage over family honor. The broken covenant hadn't just hurt the Crowe family. It had robbed Charleston of what might have been a transformative example of racial cooperation. What they discovered next would not only change their relationship forever, it would transform an entire community's understanding of their shared history. Hidden in a leather portfolio that Gabriel found tucked behind other documents was a final letter from Samuel to Thomas, written just months before Thomas's death. In it, Samuel expresses hope that their partnership would outlive them both, serving as proof that families divided by history could be united by shared commitment to justice and mutual respect. Most shocking of all was Thomas's response, a letter that had apparently never been sent, found among his personal papers. In it, Thomas had outlined his intention to formalize a protection arrangement in his will, ensuring that the Whitmore family would honor their commitment to the Crowe descendants in perpetuity. He had died before the document could be executed, leaving Samuel's family vulnerable to William's betrayal. As Gabriel and Aaliyah processed these revelations, they realized they weren't just uncovering the past. They were being given an opportunity to complete something their ancestors had started. The investigation had revealed not just the scope of the injustice that had been done, but also the magnitude of the vision that Samuel and Thomas had shared for what their families and their community could become. The transformation of the Whitmore estate didn't happen overnight. Change, real change, moves like water through limestone, slowly, persistently, reshaping everything it touches until what seemed solid becomes something entirely new. Over the months that followed that life-altering evening, the grand mansion that had stood as a monument to exclusivity began to evolve into something no one could have predicted. Vivian's softening was perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all. The woman who had built her identity around maintaining Charleston's social hierarchies found herself drawn into conversations with Aaliyah that lasted hours, stretching long into evenings when the rest of the household had gone to sleep. These weren't the polite exchanges of Southern society. They were real discussions about family, loss, resilience, and the weight of carrying forward the stories of those who came before. Listening to Aaliyah's stories became a kind of revelation for Vivian. She heard about Ruth Monroe's quiet strength during the Civil Rights era, working as a seamstress while ensuring her children received educations that would open doors their grandparents couldn't have imagined. She learned about Aaliyah's own journey from a grief-stricken 6-year-old to a confident woman dedicated to helping other families preserve their heritage through her nonprofit work. Most importantly, Vivian began to recognize the same strength and integrity in Aaliyah that she had always prized in the Whitmore women: the grace under pressure, the commitment to family honor, the quiet determination to build something lasting. These weren't qualities that belonged exclusively to Charleston's old families. They were human virtues that transcended the artificial boundaries society had constructed. She has the bearing of someone who understands legacy, Vivian confided to Winston one evening as they watched Gabriel and Aaliyah work together in the library, surrounded by documents and family histories. Not the kind of legacy we've been protecting, but the kind worth building. Winston's evolution was more gradual, but no less significant. The patriarch who had spent his life defending tradition found himself confronting the difference between honoring the past and being imprisoned by it. Gabriel's courage in facing uncomfortable truths had initially felt like a betrayal of everything Winston had worked to preserve, but as the evidence mounted and the full scope of their family's buried history emerged, his perspective began to shift. Coming to admire Gabriel's courage wasn't easy for a man who had always equated family loyalty with maintaining established narratives. But watching his son choose integrity over comfort, truth over convenience, Winston began to see qualities of leadership that went far beyond business acumen or social positioning. Gabriel was demonstrating the kind of moral courage that Winston had always claimed to value but had never been tested to display. "Your mother and I raised you to honor the family name," Winston told Gabriel during one of their morning walks around the state grounds. "I'm beginning to understand that honoring something means being willing to make it worthy of honor." The patriarch's evolution represented a fundamental choice between growth and rigid tradition. Winston could have used his considerable influence to bury the revelations, to protect the family's reputation by ensuring the story never reached beyond their inner circle. Instead, he chose to support Gabriel and Aaliyah's efforts to bring the truth to light, even when it meant acknowledging that his family's legacy was more complicated than he had ever wanted to admit. The necklace that had once been a symbol of secrecy gradually transformed into a symbol of unity. Where it had previously represented loss and mystery to the Whitmores and pain and injustice to the Monroe family, it now began to embody the possibility of reconciliation between histories that had been artificially separated. This transformation of family legacy wasn't just about changing how they saw the past. It was about actively bridging past wounds with present healing. The Whitmore family began hosting dinners where Aaliyah would share stories from her grandmother's oral history, while Vivian contributed details from the family archives. These weren't formal events, but intimate gatherings where two families began to weave their separate narratives into a shared understanding. The power of truth to transform relationships became evident in ways both large and small. Gabriel and Aaliyah's love deepened as they worked together to honor both their families' histories. Vivian found herself calling Aaliyah for advice on nonprofit initiatives, recognizing expertise that had nothing to do with social connections and everything to do with genuine commitment to community service. The community response to their revelation was as complex as Charleston itself. Initial shock rippled through the social circles where the Whitmore name had always commanded automatic respect. The interracial relationship would have been challenging enough for some to accept, but the historical implications of their connection struck at the heart of narratives that many families had built their own identities around. Some of Charleston's old guard reacted with the kind of defensive anger that surfaces when comfortable myths are challenged. There were whispered conversations at country clubs about the danger of dredging up old grievances, and concerns about what other family secrets might emerge if people started examining their own archives too closely. But the slow embrace of the story proved more powerful than the initial resistance. Gabriel and Aaliyah became symbols of hope for a community that had struggled for generations to reconcile its complicated history with its aspirations for future. Their relationship represented the possibility that love could indeed transcend the barriers that history had constructed. Young couples throughout Charleston began having conversations about their own family histories, questioning assumptions they had inherited and seeking more complete understandings of their heritage. Historical societies reported increased interest in researching connections between families that had been separated by the artificial boundaries of race and class. If this story is touching your heart the way it's touching mine, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because stories like this remind us that love really can change the world. The transformation extended beyond individual relationships to reshape how the community understood its own identity. Charleston began to see itself not as a city divided by historical grievances, but as a place where the courage to face uncomfortable truths could lead to genuine healing and growth. The healing wasn't complete. Real reconciliation takes generations to achieve, but it had begun. And it started with something as simple as a young man bringing the woman he loved home for dinner, wearing a necklace that connected their families across centuries of separation and misunderstanding. The decision to go public with their discovery required the kind of courage that transforms individuals into catalysts for historical change. For the Whitmore family, acknowledging their shared history with the Crows meant stepping away from the carefully constructed narrative that had protected their reputation for generations. But Gabriel's influence had fundamentally altered his parents' understanding of what true family honor looked like. The brave decision came during a family meeting that lasted until dawn. Winston, Vivian, Gabriel, and Aaliyah sat around the mahogany table, where 3 generations of Whitmores had made decisions that shaped Charleston's landscape. But this time they were choosing to reshape their own legacy rather than simply preserve it. "We have a choice," Gabriel said as morning light filtered through the estate's tall windows. "We can keep this truth within our family, or we can use it to start healing wounds that have been festering for over a century." Vivian, who had spent months absorbing the implications of their discoveries, surprised everyone with her response. "If we hide this now, we become complicit in the same kind of willful forgetting that created the situation in the first place." Their first public step was sponsoring historical exhibitions at Charleston's museums and cultural centers. Working with local historians and the families of other African American artisans from the Reconstruction era, they helped create displays that revealed the nuanced realities of relationships between Black and white families during the South's most turbulent period. The exhibitions challenged visitor assumptions about post-Civil War Charleston, showing how some white families had indeed formed genuine partnerships with freed slaves, while also acknowledging how economic and social pressures had undermined these relationships. The Whitmore Crow story became the centerpiece of a larger narrative about missed opportunities for racial reconciliation that might have changed the trajectory of Southern history. Cultural events followed, with the Whitmore estate hosting concerts, lectures, and community discussions that brought together people who had never shared the same social spaces. These weren't superficial gestures toward diversity, but substantive programs that encouraged real dialogue about how historical wounds continued to affect contemporary relationships. The community transformation that followed was neither immediate nor universal, but it was undeniable. Charleston moved from shock to acceptance as more families began examining their own histories and discovering connections they had never known existed. Gabriel and Aaliyah became modern symbols of what was possible when people chose courage over comfort, truth over tradition. They represented a tapestry woven with threads of past pain, but also present courage and hopeful future. Their relationship proved that acknowledging historical wrongs didn't have to perpetuate division. It could actually create the foundation for genuine understanding and mutual respect. The establishment of the Crow-Whitmore Foundation marked the culmination of their journey, from personal revelation to public reconciliation. Named after both families, the foundation focused on promoting equality and cultural preservation throughout the South, with particular attention to recovering and sharing stories that had been lost to historical amnesia. Education became their primary tool for healing. The foundation funded scholarship programs for students researching family histories that crossed racial lines, supported oral history projects in communities where such stories had been preserved through generations of careful telling, and created educational materials that helped teachers present more complete narratives about post-Civil War American society. Working together for social change, Gabriel and Aaliyah discovered that their personal love story had given them a platform for addressing systemic issues that affected thousands of families. Their foundation partnered with universities, historical societies, and community organizations to ensure that the lessons learned from their family's experience could benefit others struggling to understand their own complicated legacies. The foundation's work extended beyond historical research to contemporary social justice initiatives. They funded programs to help families separated by adoption reconnect with their cultural heritage, supported efforts to preserve African American burial grounds that had been neglected or forgotten, and created mentorship programs that connected young people with elders who could share family stories that might otherwise be lost. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of their legacy was demonstrating that love could indeed transcend boundaries that had seemed insurmountable. This was love beyond romance. It was a force that facilitated reconciliation between histories that had been artificially separated for generations. Their union represented more than the joining of two people. It was a healing of a breach that had existed since the broken promises of the Reconstruction era. Gabriel and Aaliyah's marriage became a living testament to the power of understanding to transform relationships, families, and entire communities. The wedding itself, held in the garden of the Whitmore estate, where Samuel Crowe had once delivered his masterpiece, brought together hundreds of people whose families had been connected across generations without ever knowing it. Ruth Monroe's oral histories had helped identify descendants of other African-American artisans who had worked with Charleston's white elite, creating a reunion that honored both the partnerships that had existed and the opportunities that had been lost. Their courage had succeeded in melting even the coldest hearts. Families who had initially resisted the implications of the Whitmore-Crowe revelations found themselves drawn into the healing process as they discovered their own buried connections to Charleston's complicated past. The ripple effects continued to spread throughout the region. Other cities began hosting similar exhibitions and community discussions. Universities started offering courses that examined the complex relationships between white and black families during Reconstruction. Young people began viewing their heritage not as a burden of historical grievance, but as an opportunity to understand how the past can form more just and inclusive futures. Years later, when historians assess the impact of Gabriel and Aaliyah's courage, they would identify their story as a turning point in how the South understood its own capacity for healing and growth. But for the couple themselves, the greatest legacy was knowing they had honored the vision that Samuel Crowe and Thomas Whitmore had shared over a century before. The belief that families divided by history could be united by commitment to justice, truth, and mutual respect. Today, if you visit the Crowe-Whitmore Foundation in Charleston, you'll see something extraordinary displayed in the entrance hall. The necklace that once represented centuries of separation, secrets, and broken promises now rests in place of honor, its intricate craftsmanship illuminated by soft lighting that captures every detail Samuel Crowe embedded in his masterpiece. But this is no longer just an heirloom locked away in a family vault or hidden in an attic box. It has become a beacon of hope and unity that draws thousands of visitors each year. People who come to see proof that even the most painful histories can be transformed into foundations for healing. The transformation is complete. What began as a symbol of loss has become a reminder that history, no matter how complicated or uncomfortable, can guide us toward healing rather than perpetual division. Every gleam of its gold surface now reflects not just Samuel Crowe's artistic vision, but the courage of two families who chose truth over comfort, understanding over ignorance, and love over the inherited prejudices that had separated them for generations. The necklace stands as the ultimate symbol of courage over fear. It represents the choice that every family, every community, and every society must make when confronted with uncomfortable truths about their past. We can either retreat into comfortable myths that protect our self-image but perpetuate injustice, or we can summon the courage to face reality and use that knowledge to build something better. The universal message of Gabriel and Aaliyah's story reaches far beyond Charleston, far beyond the specific circumstances of their family's history. Their journey proves that complicated history doesn't have to be a barrier to understanding. It can actually become the pathway that leads to deeper, more authentic relationships between people who've been artificially separated by circumstances beyond their control. The power of love to transcend barriers isn't just romantic idealism. It's a practical force that can reshape communities when people are willing to act on it. Gabriel and Aaliyah didn't just fall in love. They chose to let that love transform their understanding of family, heritage, and responsibility. They demonstrated that real love demands courage, the willingness to face uncomfortable truths, and a commitment to use those truths as building blocks for something better. Their story shows us that courage to face uncomfortable truths is not a one-time decision, but an ongoing choice. Every conversation with Vivian about changing family narratives, every document uncovered in the archives, every public acknowledgement of past wrongs required them to choose courage over the easier path of willful ignorance. But each act of courage made the next one possible, creating a momentum that eventually transformed not just their relationship, but their entire community. The hope for reconciliation and unity that their story represents isn't naive optimism. It's evidence-based faith in human potential. When people are willing to do the hard work of understanding each other's experiences, acknowledging past wrongs, and committing to more just relationships going forward, real change becomes possible. This is how one necklace changed everything. Not through magic, but through the power of truth to transform relationships when people are brave enough to follow where that truth leads. Samuel Crow's masterpiece became the catalyst for healing that he had always intended it to be, just over a century later than anyone could have predicted. The ripple effects of courage and love continue to spread far beyond what Gabriel and Aaliyah could have imagined that first evening at the Whitmore soiree. Families throughout the South have begun examining their own histories with new eyes. Educational programs inspired by their foundation help young people understand that heritage is not just about celebrating the past, but taking responsibility for making the future more just. Communities that have been divided by historical grievances have found ways to acknowledge painful truths while building bridges toward mutual respect and cooperation. The transformation of families and community that began with two people choosing love over fear has created a model that others can follow, adapt, and improve upon. Perhaps most importantly, their legacy represents hope for future generations. Children growing up in Charleston today learn about the Crow-Whitmore story not as ancient history, but as proof that ordinary people can choose to be agents of extraordinary change. They understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act rightly despite fear. The legacy of hope that Gabriel and Aaliyah created reminds us that we all have the power to be the ancestors that future generations will thank for having the courage to face hard truths and transform them into foundations for justice. Their story proves that sometimes the most shocking discoveries do indeed lead to the most beautiful transformations. In a world that often feels divided by forces beyond our control, Gabriel and Aaliyah's journey offers concrete evidence that love, truth, and courage can bridge any divide when people are willing to do the hard work of understanding and reconciliation. Their necklace continues to shine in that foundation entrance hall, but its real power lies in the example it represents. Proof that objects, relationships, and even entire communities can be transformed when people choose healing over hurt, truth over comfortable lies, and love over inherited fear. This story proves that sometimes the most shocking discoveries lead to the most beautiful transformations. If Gabriel and Aaliyah's courage inspired you, share this video with someone who needs to hear that love really can bridge any divide. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more soul-igniting stories that remind us of the power of truth, love, and reconciliation. Because at the end of the day, we all have the choice to be part of healing or part of division. Gabriel and Aaliyah chose healing, and their choice changed everything. Speaking of family secrets that change everything, next week, I'm sharing the story of a tech billionaire who discovered his cleaning lady was actually his long-lost sister, separated by adoption 30 years earlier. You won't believe how one overheard phone conversation led to a reunion that exposed a conspiracy involving 3 families and a fortune that was supposed to stay hidden forever. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this extraordinary story here on Soul Igniting Story. I truly appreciate you for taking the time to be with us, to open your heart, and to let these words spark something within your soul. Every story we share is crafted to inspire, to uplift, and to remind us all that love, hope, and resilience are alive in every corner of the world. If this story touched you, made you smile, or even brought a little spark of wonder to your day, I would be so grateful if you could show your support. Please give this video a like. It helps more souls discover these stories. Don't forget to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, feelings, or even your own experiences connected to the story. Your words make this community come alive. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next beautiful journey we'll be sharing together. Until next time, thank you again for being part of the Soul Igniting Story family, where every story lights a flame within.